What you guys, got another video here for you. This is the Mini-ITX gaming PC build with the RTX 4070 Ti in it. So this is what we're going to be putting together today. So buckle up, sit back and enjoy. Get yourself a cup of tea or something and make sure you watch all of the video. So here we have the part. First, we're going to go with the motherboard here. This is the Strix B650E-I gaming Wi-Fi motherboard. It's made by ASUS or ASUS if you want to call it that, depending where you are in the world. And again, we have the user manual in here. This just gives you a full layout of the motherboard, and you also have all your cable screws and fittings inside the box as well, which is nice and useful for putting this PC together. So here we have the actual motherboard itself, a really tiny motherboard as you can see here. It's exactly what I want for my desk. This is going to be my editing rig slash gaming rig, so I'm going to be using this for gaming and also general use. So here we have the actual board itself. It always amazes me how they pack everything onto these little boards here. We've got our slot for our GPU here, we've got our socket here, 2 slots for the RAM here, no 4 slots on this board because it's so small. We've got our PSU input here, and we also have our CPU input and a bunch of fan headers here, and you can see our CPU socket. We've got everything we need to get this PC up and running. We have our audio up here, and we have on the back here another M.2 slot here as well. So it's got 2 M.2 slots on this board, which I will be populating. So let's go ahead and get the board prepped, ready for the build. What I'm going to do is going to give you a quick look at the parts here. So we've got the Western Digital Black. This is the SN770, 2 TB. That's going to be plenty fast enough for my Windows drive. Now they do have faster ones out there on the market, but by going for that drive it allowed me to get also a 4 TB NVMe drive as well. Now I went with the Ryzen 7700X because that was all that was available when purchasing, but I will be swapping it out for a Ryzen 9, the latest Ryzen 9 versions. Next we went for the RAM, G.Skill DDR5 Trident Z5. This is the latest RAM that they've got, so I went for this one, and it's AMD Expo, which is the compatible for AMD systems, so we went for that. And because I went for that slightly slower drive there, it allowed me to go for a 4 TB P3 drive, which is going to be for my storage. Now again, this is a Gen 3 PCI Express 3.0, and the other one is PCI Express 4.0. And it will take PCI Express 5.0, but that's in the future. But that's what we went for this build. I'm pretty sure someone in the comments is going to go, oh, you should have bought this, you know. But hey, you know, your money, buy what you like. But hey, there's the socket there. We're going to pull this back, and you can now see that the AMD has pins in there on the board, whereas before it used to be on the chip. And this is the processor here. I do like the look of this processor. It looks absolutely cool. I love the way Ryzen are going with their processors here. So we're going for this one for this build, but I'll probably swap this out in a week or so for a Ryzen 9. So there is a little triangle down there on the bottom which we need to match up with our processor. Now also another thing to remember as well is this is a slightly different orientation to a normal system, so it might be slightly different. But here is the actual processor here. No pins on the CPU now, as you can see. And if you look on the actual processor here, you will see a little gold triangle on here, and that's all you need to marry up with the triangle on the motherboard, and that is pretty much it. So let's go ahead and get this installed into the actual socket here. So I'm just going to align this up in the correct orientation, and then we're just going to drop this in. Try not to touch the top of the CPU, it won't hurt it. You don't know oily residue from your fingers. Next, shut the lid down and literally tuck it under there and pull the retention lever back down. The plastic top bit will pop off. You can keep this for later in case you are selling the motherboard or send it back for RMA. They will definitely need that onto the motherboard if you're going to send it back. Next, we're going to remove this little heatsink here for the M.2. So let's go ahead and undo these screws, and this should take off the top heatsink here, and you can now see it's give us access to this M.2 slot here. Now there's some thermal pads on here on the top and the bottom. These will have a little plastic coating on them that you need to remove, and this will help cool down the actual NVMe drive here. And that's partly why I went for this particular NVMe drive, because it doesn't have any cooling options on it like heat sinks and stuff, which is just wasting your money on buying the heatsink version, because we're not going to be using it because it won't fit underneath underneath the motherboard heatsink, and you can see here this is the actual drive here. There's going to be plenty fast enough for what we need here, and there is drives out there that go about 7,000 reads and writes, you know, but this one does around about 5,500, something like that, and that'll be plenty enough. Just go ahead and get this inserted here. We'll just need to pull these plastic coatings off on both sides, one on the bottom and one on the heatsink here, because it's going to have a thermal pad on the bottom and the top here. That will help dissipate heat, especially on these little motherboards. Now there's a little plastic retention lever here, and you just need to clip that round and it holds the actual drive in position here. So there's no screw for this one, so you just need to get a little screwdriver and just notch that over and hold it in position. You can see it there, it just clips in. Just pull that again so you can see it there. Just push it round and then that holds that into position. Once you've done that, you just need to remove the plastic on the other top part, and then you could just screw down this back onto the motherboard, and this will keep that drive nice and cool. I just need to remove this plastic on the outside. They seem to put this plastic coating on everything on the board here just to keep everything nice and clean and so it don't scratch. Let's just remove all those, and then we can just screw this back in. There's a couple of screws. Line this up, and then we just get it all screwed back on. Now the price difference for that drive and the much faster drive that they do was quite a lot, and the money I saved on that allowed me to get the P3 4TB storage drive. Now because this PC is an ITX build, it's going to be some limitations to what you can actually put into it, so using this extra slot here as storage is going to be essential, because I haven't got no room in here for 3.5-inch drives, and I normally like to have quite a few or a couple of these on the system. So this 4TB one here, not the fastest drive on the market, but once you start getting up into the 4TB, prices do go up quite a bit, and this one was on sale. I think it was £200 or £180, so I went for it because it was on a flash sale and I bought it. So that's the reason why we're going down this route. I just need to put the little standoff on the bottom here. This should be inside the motherboard box, and there should be a little packet in there which will have the standoff and the screws. So let me just screw that down, and then we can put in the actual drive itself. Now again, they do have a spare thermal pad in here, and it's always advisable to put a thermal pad on there just to keep it nice and cool. Now again, with heat sinks and stuff like that, it's you've got to be careful because this is on the bottom and there might not be enough clearance, so you just have to plan that out a little bit better to make sure it does fit. So we're just going to screw this down and hold this into position, and I will put a thermal pad on here just to keep it cool. You can see it here, little thermal pad, just stick that on the bottom and that'll be plenty enough to keep that cool. So we've got that now done. Let's flip it over, and then we can now pull these little retention levers back for the RAM, and we will then put the RAM in. So there should be just 2 of them here. These are solid, so there's 2 that open and 2 that don't, and we're going to be putting in the RAM. So I went for this one, and this will be plenty fast enough. I think it's 5,000 megahertz, and we've gone for this particular type of RAM for this system, and there's the label on there. So that'll be good enough for what we need for this build. Now there is only 2 slots here, so we've got 32 gigabytes, so that'll be plenty for what I need here. I normally go for around about 32 or 64, but that's only because I do VMs and stuff like that, so I'll have to get by with 32 on this one. If it's not enough, I can always replace it with 64 gigs, but there is only 2 slots, which means upgrade path is not great for this particular board. So let's just line these up here, and you just need to slot these in and then click them down. Make sure you're onto a firm surface here. See, a lot of people do it on the box. It's okay on a box, but you just want to make sure that you don't get no bending or arcing in the board, because it can crack traces on the motherboard, so be very careful. So that's now all done, and what we need to do now is get this ready for changing the actual bracket here. We will need to change the bracket for the CPU, so we'll be putting a water cooler on here, so I need to remove this bracket here, and we will put in some little tiny standoffs on here. So I'm just going to go ahead and remove these screws. You want to keep these safe just in case you need to send the motherboard back or something like that, or you're selling it. You want to always give these parts to the person that you're selling the board to, or if you're RMAing it, Now we can leave the back plate on the board, we don't need to remove that. Now this is the Phanteks Glacier 1 280MP. Now unfortunately this is the wrong size. It should have been a Glacier 1 240MP, but I did order a 240 and they sent a 280MP. So I'm going to end up having to use this in another build. So I will replace this with the 240, which you'll see a little bit later on in the video. But meantime, I can still use the standoffs that come in the box, and I'll replace them when I get the other one and swap them back out. So I could send it back, but I'll use it for something else. So let me just go ahead and get the correct ones out. Because this is AMD, we're going to be using the AMD little standoffs here to screw onto the motherboard, and they will screw in this way. Now everything was labeled, so you're not going to make any mistakes, but if you do not know what you're doing here, you can always use the manual, installation manual. It's pretty straightforward, just follow that, or look for tutorials online on how to install these. I'm pretty sure someone has done something of that nature on YouTube. So let's go ahead and just get this on. I'm going to put these 4 on, and that will be as far as we can go with this board until I get the replacement. But I will continue and just put this into the case now. You can see that little pad on the bottom there. I've just got the plastic on there protecting it, and there's our little back plate. We can leave that still on there, we don't need to change that. On some motherboards you might have to, but this one we don't. So let's go ahead and we can use these later on. These are the actual bracket, and we will need to use this as well. So the case we've gone for is the Phanteks Eclipse P200. This is quite a large ITX case, but this is the one I've chosen for this. I was looking at another case, but I've changed my mind and we went for this one. It's quite a cheap case, believe it or not. It's around about £65, but you do get quite a bit for your money for £65. And I was going to do a review on it, but I was not sure you guys wanted to watch a review on a PC case. But the power supply goes up here, no power supply shroud. We will be removing these plastic parts here. These are where the radiator is going to sit, and that's what we're going to do here. So I'm just going to pop these out, but you can normally sit the SSDs on here as well. As you can see, there's some little SSDs there. If you're going to be using a air cooler, you could basically use this or something along those lines, but we're going to be removing those because the radiator is going to be sitting down that location there. So next up, what I'm going to do here is some nice cable management here. As you can see, if you're looking to channel your cable management out, and there's some nice metal brackets here to hold the cables in. A word of warning though, if you've got a lot of cables, it is quite a tough case to build in because there's not a lot of room around the back for cable management. So bear that in mind if you're looking to pack this out to the gills with fans and other bits and pieces. That's going to add more cables, as you will definitely need to use a modular power supply for this one. I would recommend one of those. So I'm just going to drop the actual motherboard in. Now it's already got its own IO shield built onto the motherboard itself. The standoffs are in the correct location. I've checked all those, and that normally is the case for these particular builds nowadays. The standoffs are normally in the correct location, but always check to make sure they're not sitting underneath the motherboard in the wrong place, because it will short the board out. So I'll just quickly get the motherboard screwed in, and once we've got this done, we can put that extraction fan in as well. Now I'm going to be using the graphics card in the normal position here, and the reason for it is because the actual fan, you put an extraction fan in this case, and I've gone for the Phanteks identical fans here, so we can use these. Should be the same as these ones here, and we'll have a radiator down here as well. But we do need some airflow to be extracted from here, and this case has a bit of a weird layout. If you have the GPU in the vertical position, you can't put an extraction fan at the back, you have to then put it at the bottom, but some graphics cards are too large. Now the fan orientation should have some little arrows on here. You can see them on here. The camera's a bit bright, but you should be able to see some little arrows, and it will tell you the airflow, which way it's going. So we definitely want to be putting it this way. Make sure the cable's in the right orientation here, so you can cable manage that a little bit easier. And then we'll put it here, and we'll just screw this fan into the back, and this will allow air to come in the front and extract out the back. And we'll also be extracting air through the radiator as well. So we should have a pretty good exhaust system on here as well as intake. The actual power supply as well is going to be acting as an exhaust because it will be drawing air in from the fan, because there is no shroud and there's no ventilation up the top, and that will be blowing air out the back. So we'll be having plenty of extraction here. Now, never use these wire ties here. I see these wire ties on everything, and I've seen people in videos using these, but there's a little tiny bit of wire in these. If it touches the board, it's going to short your board, so be very, very careful. And you shouldn't be using things like this. Use the cable ties, which are completely plastic. You can get those on Amazon. I'll leave a link in a video description. Now, we've gone for a 1000-watt power supply here, gold certified, ATX 3.0. It's the latest compatible power supplies. And this is a pretty beefy power supply. I didn't need to go this big, but there was a deal on, and it wasn't worth the difference between, say, an 850 watt or a 750 watt to a 1000 watt. So I just went for the 1000 watt, and this is it right here. And it's pretty lightweight, to be honest with you. I was expecting something a little bit more heavier than this, but there is an actual nice bit of side logo here. Unfortunately, we won't see that side because that is going to be with the fan down. So if it was in the shroud, you should see this. This is probably RGB, but again, we won't see that. It will be against the metal. But not bad little power supply here. 1000 watts, be plenty of power, and it'll only draw the power it needs. So people that always say that you know, you're overkill, it's not going to pull that amount of power. It'll only pull the power that it needs, so it'll be very efficient. And this is what we're looking for here. This will go straight to the graphics card from here. No actual extensions, cables. It will go straight into the power supply. It's fully modular, and in a build like this, you definitely need fully modular power supplies to help reduce the amount of cabling, because the cabling is going to be visible and it's going to be difficult. Now, unfortunately, like I mentioned, you can't have it sitting like this because there is no ventilation up the top to allow it to draw air into the power supply. So we can't use it this way, unfortunately, which is the way they want you to use it. So we're going to have to flip this around the other way, and that way we can then use the fan inside. Now, this is just the nature of the case, but you can see the amount of cables here. There is a ton of cables. I'm not a fan of these cables, to be honest with you, either. They don't look as nice when they're tied together. They just look a bit messy for me. But I didn't realize that was that type of cable. You can see here, these are the cables. They're good quality cables, but they're a little bit messy, and they could have done with some cable combs in here or something like that to hold them in position better. And again, you've got the PSU one here. Will go onto PSU, and that will go straight to the graphics card. So we've got the exact cable we're going to need for the GPU here, which is what I wanted to do. So I didn't want any sort of extension cable. So this, it says on here PSU, that will go into the power supply itself. And all you need to do here is plug this into the power supply that says PSU on it, and then the other side will go into the piece of hardware that you're plugging it into. So that is the cables all done, and you can see already the amount of cables that we've saved because we don't need them in this build. And it just means it just cuts down on the bulk inside here, and especially something like this, which is going to be a bit more harder to hide the cables on. So let me go ahead, and you can see how these cables look. They're not the best. I don't like the look of these, in my honest opinion. I do wish they had some sort of sleeving on them, but we'll just slot this in. And this has a little bracket system on here. A little bit difficult with a tripod in front of me here, but I'll try my best to get that in the camera shot. There is a little tiny bracket that goes on the case, and you screw that to the actual power supply, and then you just feed it through so it sits like that. Unfortunately, this is not going to be there, and we'll have to flip it around this way so the fan is at the bottom, but there's no RGB on this side, so that's okay. So let's just go ahead and slip this through. You have to feed it through the actual hole and slide it in, and then that should be okay. So let's go ahead and do that. It's a bit tricky. This is the way you insert this particular type of power supply on this case. I'm just going to slide it in here. Now you can see the problem you're going to have with cables here if you had a load of them and it wasn't modular. There'll be quite a lot of cabling. Now again, if you're looking for an ultra clean build with very little cables so you can't see them, then maybe a build like this wouldn't be for you, because the ITX build and the type of case it is will display some cables. You can't hide them all. It's just not possible. And this is how these particular builds are. So with the power supply up the top there with no power supply shroud, it just means that there's nowhere to hide all the cables. So they are going to be visible no matter what you do, no matter how hard you try, they are going to be visible. So if you want that ultra clean looking build, then maybe this case isn't for you. So let's go ahead and finish this off and screw this in. And just want to say that I do like this case. I think it's a very good case for an ITX build. It's not super small. It does give you a fair bit of room, and it also allows you to use full-length graphics cards on here, which is the added bonus of going for this sort of case. Really, it doesn't break the bank. It's a really good affordable case, around about £65, and I think Phanteks have done a pretty good job on it. And there's always improvements you can make on these sort of cases, but I've routed the cables through the case here, and all I need to do now is just plug these into the board here. Now you can already see when I'm poking these through here and putting them into the board itself. This is the power supply 24 pin, and you can see how that's spraying open there, those cables. They're not very tidy. I don't like the look of that. I might have to get some cable extensions or something, but yeah, I'm not happy with the way that's looking. For this sort of price point, that needs to be better. So as you can see, I went for the Phanteks Glacier one, 240MP. I did get the wrong one. It was 280MP. I'm sure I ordered the 240MP and they sent the 280, but yeah, I could send it back, but I'll use it for another build. But we now got the correct one. I've ordered another one, 240MP by Phanteks. Now you might be thinking there's a lot of Phanteks stuff here. This is not sponsored by Phanteks, by the way. I just like some of their stuff. It's pretty good. You've got everything you need here. You've got your fans and also your brackets, your screws and everything else, all nicely packaged here with the pump having compound already pre-applied, and they also give you a tube of compound as well. Just go ahead and get these mounted. Now we're going to have these pushing down here. These are not RGB fans, and if you are looking for RGB fans and you want to still use these particular fans, Phanteks do have some sort of halo that you could attach to these, but unfortunately with the limitation to headers on the mold, I didn't go for those, which would have added a little bit of RGB on the front of these. But you know, it depends whether you want RGB or not. You can completely replace the fans with a fan of your choice if you wish, but again, why would you want to buy this cooler if you're going to replace the fans? It's just a waste of money. So these fans are perfectly good, and they are very good quality fans, so that's why we're leaving them on there. And they are white, and they match the rear fan, and would also match the front fans as well. So I'm going to put the long screws in, and we're going to screw this down to the actual radiator here. Now you don't want to be over tightening these. Always use a hand screwdriver. You don't need to use electric screwdrivers for things like this. You're just going to end up stripping the screws or stripping the heads on the radiator. So just do it by hand, and just take your time and don't over tighten them, and you should be good to go. And once we've got the fans all screwed up, we'll be able to put this into the actual case. And there's some little screws here as well that come with some little washers that you would use to hold the radiator into the case as well. I'll show you that a little bit later once I've screwed this last one in here, and then we can move on to the next step. Now if you don't like water cooling or closed loop water cooled systems, you can go for air cooling. There's nothing wrong with it. Just choose what you want for your build. There's always going to be people that tell you you've chosen the wrong parts. You know, choose the parts that you can afford, but make sure you get a nice balanced system, and you should be okay. So what we're going to do here is we're going to daisy chain these two fans here, which is what it's designed to do here, and we'll tuck this one up here, and that should be nice. Make sure you got those cables around the right way. If not, you can rotate these a little bit later on. I think these should have been on this side. I'll probably rotate those if I need to, and we'll go ahead and get this ready for the installation. So let me go ahead and insert this, and you can see the PC starting to come together now. So I did rotate those fans around so they were on this side, so I can get to the header on the motherboard, because the fan cable, believe it or not, was not long enough to reach the header on the motherboard. But hey, that's part of PC building, and that's what you have to do. You have to adapt while you're building these PCs. Keep the plastic cover on the pump here that has got the compound on here, otherwise you're going to end up getting compound all over your jumper and all over your hands, and it's really messy stuff. So you can see the fan header here is just right here, and it wasn't long enough, so I need to plug all these into the motherboard, and that's what we're going to do. So I've got this up right here, so I'm going to lift this up and get this screwed in, and I'll do that right now so we can screw this back into the case. Now this is the tricky part. You will need your hand round the front holding the radiator, and you will need to then screw this in. Obviously I had the tripod in a way, so I had to do that off camera, but now you can see this is basically what you got to do, and get that screwed into position, and then follow through and do all the rest of the other screws in there. Once that's done, we can go around the front and put the pump on and tighten the front pump up, and we should be okay. Now you can see the cables now starting to get a little bit messy, and there's not a lot of room around the back here, so you just have to get this super tight here and get it clean, otherwise the side panel won't go on, because these side panels are pop-on ones. They will not screw down, so you have to make sure there's no bulging parts here, as they're going to keep popping out. So all there is to do on this now is to just put all of the cables into the motherboard. So I'm going to plug these in, and you can't really see much here, it's a little bit dark, but you just need to put these into the right headers on the board, and your manual will tell you exactly what headers are what, and that's why your manual is so important. Now this plastic thing can come off, and you can see it's already preloaded with compound. You do get a spare bit of compound as well from Phanteks. I'm just going to turn this and remove this bracket, because that's for an Intel socket, and we need to put the AMD version on, and these just clip into position and then twist and turn it. Now it needs to be in the right location, and then turn it and it will lock into position, and you can basically put this down onto the little standoffs that we had earlier. Once you've got this into position here, you can then use the thumb screws to tighten up onto the actual cooler pump itself. So let me go ahead and get that into position, and then we can get the actual thumb screws to screw down here, and they do have a little screw head on them, so just tighten these up with your fingers first, and then you can go around and nip these up with a screwdriver, and just don't over tighten them. It doesn't have to be ultra tight, just needs to be tight enough to hold it into position here. So let's go ahead and get those screwed on, and there's 4 of them here. I'll just do them diagonally like this, and that should be fine. Once we've done this, we can put the rest of the cables in, and we can tidy some of that cable management up, and then get the graphics card in as well. And you can see everything's tucked in there nice and tightly now. You can see those cables are visible. There's not a lot you can do about that, and you just have to be mindful about things like this when you're building something like this as well. Now again, this is probably not ideal for the first time builder, this sort of build, because obviously the size of the actual case and the difficulty with cable management and things like that. So just bear that in mind if you're building a PC for the first time. This is probably not the best one to go for when you're building a PC for the first time. So what we need to do now is slot on this little cover here. This is the RGB part. It slots on top and clips into position, and then there's a little cable which gives it RGB, and you just need to plug that into the actual header on the board. Now again, something like this with a small ITX board, it doesn't have a lot of headers on here, so you are going to need probably a fan hub or something like that to control all of this. And again, you're limited for space for those, and I had to put one in up near the power supply. So let's remove these expansion slot covers. They're held on with 3 thumb screws. This is a 3-bay card, and we need to remove all 3 of these to get the graphics card in. Now this is quite a beefy card, and if you are building something like this with this particular case, then you should be able to get a 4070 Ti in there. Just make sure you measure everything and make sure that all of the dimensions are correct. It took me a while to work out whether this would actually fit or not. I thought it was going to be really tight to fit in there because of some of the dimensions they had on the case website and also on the manufacturer's website for the graphics card, but it did squeeze in there okay. And you can see the card here is a little bit bigger than 3 slots because of that plastic notch at the bottom on the plastic shroud here. So I need to remove that audio cable down there, it won't fit with that in there, and I did that off camera because that will sit underneath the actual graphics card and it was stopping it going in. So I had to basically remove that and then slot this into position, and it went in perfectly fine. So the audio cable will have to slot along the top. You'll see it once it's in. At the moment it won't sit down, so I didn't spot it at first, but it's in a really horrible position, that audio cable, and that's due to the motherboard design itself. But I'll show you that in a second when we get round. So I'm just going to use this Phanteks fan hub here, and again I've gone with Phanteks and try to keep it all together, and you can see there's a damage mark on that radiator there. I think I must have sat that down onto some sort of screw or something, or a cable, and it's pinched it a little bit. It should be fine. Just go ahead and get these cables in, and there's just not enough heads on the board, so I'm just going to tidy this up a little bit, and I'm going to probably put it up near the power supply area. And I've managed to get it all in now, as you can see. You can see that audio cable having to go along the top of the graphics card. Everything's slotted in, and that's about as good as you're going to get that cable management really on a build like this. Probably be able to add a few more cable ties when they get delivered to me, and to tidy that up a little bit more, but other than that, that is pretty much it. And I will need to benchmark this and make sure that graphics card is okay, being that close to the bottom. There is a massive big mesh system down the bottom there, so that should allow airflow to come in. And that is the finished result. It turned out pretty nice, as you can see here. Not too bad. It's going to be a workhorse. It's not going to be a thing of beauty. I needed something small and powerful, and that's what I've got right here. And I will put a Ryzen 9 in here as well, and that should be perfectly fine. Airflow was pretty good as well. I will do another follow-up video of some benchmarks and also some temps, so you can see in another video. If you want to see that, let me know in the comments section below. Again, cable management, probably could do with a little bit more cable ties on there, and I'll get those ordered and get that done. But other than that, I think it turned out pretty well, considering this is an ITX build and it's a pretty open sort of build. There's no shroud to hide all your cables and stuff, so it's about as good as you're going to get really. As long as you can accept the fact that there's going to be some cables visible, then you should be okay with this sort of build. And again, like I said, this is going to be my video editing and also a little bit of gaming on this system, and I needed a bit more workspace on the desk, so this will fit the bill perfectly fine. I'll leave a link to all the parts I used in the video description if you're interested. Another thing I just want to say is the cable management in the back is a little bit tight. If you are looking for something like this, there's a lot of cables here, and you have to make sure they are tucked in nice and tight, because otherwise you will not get that back panel on. So bear that in mind if you're looking for something like this. But all in all, I'm pretty happy with the way it turned out. And you can change the colours to whatever colours you like. I do like this purpley look, and it doesn't do it justice on camera, but all in all, I'm pretty happy with it. I would have liked to see some RGB fans on the actual cooler there, but there is those halo ones that I could probably put on there. But again, I would have to look at another hub for adding those cables into that. Anyway, my name has been Brian from briteccomputers.co.uk. If you've watched it all to the end, then say the word sausage in the comment section, and I know you've watched the whole video. And I just want to say a quick shout out to all my YouTube members who have joined my YouTube members group. I appreciate the support. I shall catch you in the next video, or I'll see you on the Discord server for a chat. Bye for now.